begun. We're going to talk to you today about proposed changes to the ROR metadata schema. And I just wanted to mention already that we did do quite an extensive feedback process. And so this is, we have the word final in quotation marks multiple times. We've, digested and summarized that community feedback and have created a new proposal from that. But we want just a little small bit of extra time for everybody to review that and make sure that that's the direction we want to go in. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that this is the very first time we will have changed the ROR schema, and we don't anticipate by any means that this will be the end of the evolution of the ROR schema, but we wanted to get some sort of major changes done first. So please pay particular attention to what we're proposing about names and about links, but feel free to go through the document as well. And you can also make comments in the document. Yes, thank you, Liz, for sharing the revised quote unquote final draft. Do feel free to comment in that so that we can keep the conversation all in one place. And with that, I will turn it over to Liz.
All right, thank you so much. So hi, everyone. If we haven't met or seen each other before, I'm Liz Krasnarich. I am the technical lead for ROR. So I do all things technical, write code, write specifications, keep things up and running, and also am responsible for writing the majority of this document. So everything in there that you find issue with is probably my fault, but it did come out of a lot of discussion internally and externally. So in this call, we'll talk about some of the background for the schema changes, what prompted this and how we're going about it, as well as the actual changes for each of the sections that we're looking to address in this round of changes. So I pasted a couple links in the chat. One of them is the slides that you're looking at, and the other one is the link to the semi-final draft, although nothing is actually ever truly final around here, of the schema version 2.0, which is the same document that Amanda sent out in the materials for this meeting. All righty. So those who've joined some of the other calls in the last year or so might know that we have been talking about the process for making changes to the ROR schema as well as the API for a while. And that was kind of the first step in this process to kind of create this understanding with the community that we're not going to just dump changes into the production services without warning, and there's going to be a specific process and kind of rules about how we communicate it before that. So before we even started working on the actual schema proposal that we have here, we created a framework for how we were going to do schema and API versioning. And the rationale behind this is that we originally started with all of our metadata schema inherited from Grid. As we have been working with the data and working with the curation process, there are things that have come up that internally we found that we would really like to change, either to serve the curation process better or to serve use cases that we're hearing from the community a bit better. And we've also gotten lots of suggestions from folks out in the community about changes that they would like to see. But we couldn't really do this until we had figured out how we were going to version the schema and the API. So we spent a couple of months last year just working through that approach. We circulated a document for comment. This is just all kind of historical stuff that happened at the end of last year. But the highlights are that we are versioning both the schema and the API. We will support at least 2 versions of the schema at any given time, kind of depending on when the new schema release lines up with the sunset date. And we will have at least a year of notice before sunsetting a previous version, and we won't release more than 1 version each year. Although I would actually expect after this one, the rate of changes to be far less than once per year. So we also, in creating this approach, came up with the process for proposing schema changes and reviewing them, which is what we're going through right now. So we have, over the past couple of years, had a number of schema change requests submitted to us. We have compiled those suggestions into a draft proposal for review, which is a document, the initial draft document that was open for public comment from mid-December to mid-February. We've now compiled all the comments on that, and we are working on the final draft, the revised version based on all that public comment feedback. So the initial draft is linked from the final draft, but if you'd like to take a look at it, I'll paste the link into the chat. It looks very similar to the final draft, but with several fewer sections. So to give an overview of what we've been working on, we have a few specific areas that we are looking at making changes to, and the document, both the initial and final draft, is divided up by those kind of metadata topic areas. So we're looking specifically at names, location information, web domains and links, external identifiers, and then administrative information, such as created and last modified dates. So again, we had this document open for a number of months. We had lots of feedback in the document. So thanks so much to everyone who commented on the initial draft. Just to explain the process that happened after that feedback period closed, I took all of the comments and exported them out into a separate document. I anonymized them just to, as I was going through them, to make sure everybody's feedback was, kind of objectively assessed. I put all of those comments into a document that is linked from the final draft, also grouped by the topic area of the comments. So you'll see here basically every single comment and discussion in the different topic areas. The only thing that I did to change them was to move around some of the comments that were in different topics, but belong to another, more so belong to another topic. So you'll see the whole conversation, and then I summarized each section into some key takeaways. So that's the long document, but we'll take a look at the summary in the slides that I'm about to go through. So just want to let you know that this is there for you to review in great detail if you would like to, but we'll go over this in brief in this meeting. So we took the comments, summarized them, and then based on those comments, made some changes to the schema proposal, discussed them internally. Some of the comments were, things that they kind of fell into three categories: things that, yes, absolutely, we can make that change to the schema, or yes, but there are some potential very large curation issues that might make this not such a great change for right now. And then, some cases of maybe conflicting feedback or things that might be technically out of scope for right this moment. So we'll kind of address those in the summary. So that has all resulted in this revised final draft document, which is also broken down into the different kind of metadata topic sections. But what you'll see in here is another subsection inside of each section that explains the changes between this version and the previous version. So those are all highlighted in yellow, and the most current proposed approach for each section is the one that's in that's in orange. So basically the orange and yellow stuff is mostly what's new in this final draft. Before we get into the actual content of the changes and the comments, are there any questions about the process or what's in this document that anyone has? Alrighty, let's dive into the actual metadata. So I want to start and focus on the names section because that is an area that that ultimately probably will have significant changes and will affect basically everyone who uses ROR data or the ROR API. So just to refresh, currently we have name information that's contained in 4 different fields in ROR records. We have acronyms, aliases, labels, and then name. Some use cases that caused us to consider making changes to this field were language codes. So we have a number of users who wanted to be able to have more information about the language of a particular name. And right now, only the labels field supports language codes. We don't actually have a language code for the value that's in the name field, which is a bit of a challenge for users because it's not necessarily in English. It depends on the organization. And right now, if you're trying to, for example, run a multilingual application and figure out what the current value in the name field is, it's not obvious. So a lot of the motivation is around multilingual support. Also, there's been some interest in identifying additional name types in the future, such as legal name, transliterated names, other sorts of things that this structure with specific field names to capture these different kinds of names doesn't really support very well and is not particularly extensible. So our initial draft, combined all of the current names fields inside another names element and changed some of the names and added language codes to each of the name sections. The feedback that we got on this was that these subdivisions of names were kind of arbitrary, and often what happens is that these become, especially with the primary name, Anglo-centric, and it's really a subjective choice about what goes in primary and what's translated. It really depends on your perspective. So there was lots of discussion around names, and ultimately what we've included in the draft proposal is flattening that structure to pull the name values out of their somewhat subjective field categorizations and allow each name to have one or more types. Each name can have a language code, and the way that we will choose one for display in the main title of the search user interface is to give one of them a type of ROR display, which is also something that integrators who don't really have another way to make a choice about which name they want to grab from the ROR data set, they could use this ROR display type. So all name types will support an optional language code. Each name can have one or more types. The reasoning behind this is that we may add more types in the future, such as legal name that could be sort of overlapping. Like you might have a legal name that is also the ROR display name, or a legal name that is a label and or a legal name that is an alias and also some other type. So I guess looking at the feedback summary, what came across very clearly was that supporting language variations for a given name was extremely important, and that separating them into these arbitrary categories was subjective and added unnecessary complexity. So that's kind of the rationale behind these changes. One of the areas in the document that we've highlighted as being a key area we're looking for feedback on are the proposed types for names, which internally we went round and round and back and forth on a lot, because what we're trying to avoid is subjective decisions about what a primary name is versus a translated name. But we also want to make this as interoperable as we can with at least some other identifier systems. So for background, one of the reasons that the current schema has aliases and labels is because Wikidata uses the same structure for its names. So ultimately, we kept the alias, label, and acronym types and added on the ROR display type, with, again, the idea that there may be additional types added in the future. In the document, there is a kind of lengthy appendix discussing the particular use cases that we came up with based on feedback we've heard from the community for these different name types. So I really encourage you to go through this in more detail, but the basic use cases were in searching and matching, prioritizing or deprioritizing specific name types. For example, acronyms we know are not great for searching and matching because acronyms aren't very unique among different organizations. So you may want to deprioritize those in search results. Choosing a default for display, choosing a specific name variant for use in your application, and then internally a very basic function that we need to serve in the schema migration is reasonably easy crosswalking between the current schema and the new version. So I'll pause there because I see some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I think it's mainly Charlie. I just put in a
You can feel the disregard things, since I gave Amanda more than she needed feedback.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But, yeah. What I was just mentioning is anything to sort of reduce future curation burden by coming up with like rule-based systems. So like you wouldn't have to do this ROR display thing if you had sort of a flow chart that's implemented programmatically.
So we've gone back and forth on this, and I would say it's still open for discussion because this could certainly be rule-based. So the case that we were also considering is not just internal display, but for cases where ROR is integrated into other systems, we'll say the type ahead that's in OJS, for example. The thinking was that it might be more difficult for those kinds of integrations to be easily built and implemented if there's not some way to choose a default display name. So OJS is used for lots of different cases across lots of different geographical areas. If each integration has to come up with its own specific rules for choosing a default display name in like a type ahead case, that might be a bit of a barrier to building those kinds of integrations.
Yeah. Sorry, I realized that like you were giving your talk and I just interrupted. Is that kind of is that okay? Like, maybe
that's totally fine.
Sure. I would just say, I encourage you to put that in a comment on the Google Doc as well, because I think it is interesting. And I see that Chris has his hand raised as well.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'll do the same with the document when I have a chance. I'm on the road right now, but I wanted to just give some feedback that some of the feedback I'm getting internally and customer facing is that submitters would like the choice of the different aliases to choose from when submitting, and then to have it mapped to the ROR ID under the hood, I think would be our ideal. In fact, you guys just put together a little demo for me, a type ahead demo that includes both the kind of name of record and then say the alias in one result, which is really cool. And I'm probably going to follow up on that email to ask if it's possible to include just all the aliases equally for the submitter. That way, if they want to use a certain version, if it's a German version versus an English version of the name, and you guys already have them both, one as the kind of parent and one as the alias, if they're listed equally, but they both map to the same ROR ID once selected, I think that would be ideal for our use cases internally.
Yeah, I think, and that's, I guess, more a matter of implementation than schema, but that was part of the logic in grouping the names together, because we do have cases where with the names in separate fields, some questions that have come up are, or at least there's evidence that has come up that folks sometimes don't realize that that labels or aliases is also a name, that they should be including potentially in their integration. So that was part of the rationale in bringing together all of these different name forms into one names field.
So the sticking point on my end for the submitter is that the author wants to keep whatever version they chose. So say, for example, University of Stuttgart, right? There's the English version, I think is the parent. I might be getting this backwards. And then there's the German version as an alias. So right now, if the submitter comes in and picks the alias or types ahead the alias, if they find the parent is what goes through the system. And that's not what the author necessarily wants to see on the paper. So we can manually fix that, of course, but we're not sure what their intent is. And to have both choices at their fingertips would be ideal, not only for us, but for their preferences.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of ROR, those names would both match to a particular ROR ID. It's more an implementation topic.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, because in the system, I mean, we have this case that I worked at ORCID previously, and we had an intermediary layer of database in there so that when a user picked an organization, they could pick a different name, but that had to be captured in the application itself to say that this thing the user picked is their primary preference for the organization.
Right.
Name. So it's possible is the point that requires some implementation.
Understood. Thank you.
And Carly, I think you've got your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, and this is just kind of on the implementation side, getting to kind of what Chris was saying. I'm from the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Scientific and Technical Information, and just wanted to share that we maintain kind of our internal organization authority name, and we have sometimes 50 aliases for different organization names, and I don't know if they're probably not all captured in ROR. So at some point, if ROR is interested, we can provide all of that. But just to let kind of Chris and others know that we're handling a lot of that internally. So we do allow folks to kind of provide whatever name they want. And then we are doing kind of that mapping behind the scenes to ROR. So we're keeping kind of all of those aliases ourselves as well, just because I think right now, understandably, ROR might not have kind of all of the aliases that we've seen where we've been collecting this data for, goodness, 40 years maybe. So anyway, I just want to kind of mention that some of that on the implementation side, we are doing in-house right now, just understanding that we might have kind of more data right now than is included in the ROR in the ROR record. So I guess just a question to ROR, and you don't have to answer it now, is, you know, if you're interested in kind of adding some of that additional information that other organizations might have.
Yes, we absolutely
Always.
are. We do have the curation form and process now. We handle bulk requests kind of as a case by case basis. We're looking to improve the feedback loop in the future, because absolutely the more information, particularly about aliases, acronyms, that sort of stuff, the more information that we have that we can put into the records, the better our search services work, and the better other integrations can work as well.
Yeah. Sorry if I can just add a comment.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so for the curation process, really what we're looking at in terms of adding aliases to the records is demonstrated examples of affiliation usage, because obviously in the context of matching or authors identifying themselves, we want kind of a clear one-to-one connection between a research output and an affiliation. In some cases, you know, variant forms of those can also help for exposing things in search or matching affiliation context. So what's especially useful, which I'm sure DOE OSTI has, is associations between specific research outputs and aliases such that they can be identified. The challenge with integrating aliases sometimes in the abstract can be, in the absence of those research outputs, you can kind of pollute the data set such that it becomes, for a given record, such that it becomes overly broad, and then, you know, it's matching to too many things. So, but yeah, we're definitely interested in integrating those, and especially where, you know, they have clear kind of links between research outputs.
I do think this sounds like, you know, maybe the subject of another call or a community call, you know, that particular case of, you know, how do you let the user choose a particular name and have that show up, and then only that name show up to them, but store the ROR in the background, is something that many people are interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so let's move on to additional things about the schema. Again, totally encourage you to put all of this in the document. It sounds to me as though, anyway, let's move on to location information.
Yeah, there's a heck of a lot we could talk about names, and we could probably go on for hours, but I will leave it at that and let you digest the schema document and comment there, and we'll move on to location information, which I'm going to switch to the document because I know it's really, really tiny on the slides. So background on location information is that that grid included an incredible level of granularity about location information. Basically, they pulled in nearly the entire geonames record for each given record. So each organization has a geonames ID that is associated with that organization. The most granular one that we capture is the one that is in geoname city currently, and that is the one that is used to pull in the rest of the geonames information. Although I will say that even though it's called geoname city ID in the current record, because not every organization is located in a city, it's not necessarily always a city. We have, you know, research stations in Antarctica and remote places that don't have cities. So from our understanding of use cases for location information, much of this isn't actually being used. So the geonames, the many levels of geonames admin information, we had sort of an extraneous license attribution that is present in every single record that we would prefer to just cover with the general license statement for ROR data. There was also some NUTS information that was not populated in grid records, and then some postcode and a field called line that was never populated in grid records. So some extraneous fields that never had data in them. So there's a lot of information in that field that is debatably useful for most ROR users. Also, in curating these records, we have run into a lot of issues with using the geonames data and API because it changes fairly frequently, and it's causes some hiccups and some bottlenecks in the curation process when things are changing as we're trying to curate records, and it's coming down to very granular kind of minor stuff, maybe buried in the deep details of the geonames metadata. So to simplify the data for users so that they get a smaller chunk of information back in a response, and also to simplify the curation process a bit, what we have proposed to condense it down to is just the geonames ID, and we've removed the city from this because it doesn't always indicate a city. So the most granular geonames ID that we have for the administrative division that an organization is located in, and then some basic details pulled in from geonames about that ID, with the idea being that, so geonames has a free API and a free data set. If you need to get the really detailed information about that geonames ID, you could go and get it from geonames. So that's the major changes in this field. One other aspect that's come up, so we're also suggesting changing the field name from addresses to locations, because it doesn't actually contain any street address information. And this field has always been an array that supports multiple values, although none of them currently have multiple sets of information in this field. However, that's something that we've had requests for. So our plan is to remove the constraint that limits it to one value to support multiple values, but we do want to be very careful with the use of that. The main use case is for organizations that actually fully exist in two locations. That has come up multiple times. We don't really want to use this to capture things that maybe should be a separate organization, or every single location for every field office of an organization everywhere. We do want to keep it to a fairly narrow scope, because this can quickly devolve into ROR being an organization that curates information about the location of places, which is not exactly where our primary focus is, and it is not the bulk of use of ROR data that we've seen. So the feedback that we've gotten on that change was largely positive, that reducing the complexity was good, and that multiple locations should be supported. An issue that came up that we've been aware of because we're familiar with the data internally. So there's some inconsistency in the latitude and longitude in the records inherited from grid. Also, due to changes in the curation processes. So in the grid records, some latitudes and longitudes were more specific than the geonames identifier, as in they were specific to some building on an institution's campus or some street address. Not all of them. There are a couple of users who've raised this as something that they would like to see maintained. A challenge is that we do have lots of latitude and longitude that just correspond to the geonames identifier, and that is obviously a much easier thing to curate versus then trying to dig up the more granular coordinates for a location. So this is more the curation and what the value of the data is versus the actual schema structure itself, but it's something that's on our radar. We're thinking about how we could potentially handle this in the future. Geonames, for now in this schema, the latitude and longitude officially the definition of that value is the coordinates that correspond to the geonames ID. We have, however, in digging around in the geonames data, found that they have IDs for some more granular locations that are organizations that are not administrative regions. So we may entertain that at some point in the future, just replacing the geonames ID with a more specific location. So I guess I'm curious if anyone has thoughts or comments on that, or if you're using the coordinates from ROR records for something that really depends on them being extremely accurate.
Hi there. I'll make a comment about how I've used those lat long data in the past. I was going through a matching exercise where I had one set of data from one scheme with one set of latitude and longitudes, and then from another scheme, the same lats and longs. So whenever I was trying to match, I would calculate the distance between those two latitudes and longitudes. And, you know, they might be very close or they might be 1,000 miles apart. And so it did give me some sense as to whether I was on the right track with my matching. So the more accurate you have, the better, I would say, rather than it being kind of, you know, center of a city, for example. So I definitely favor, if you can dig around in geonames for some better data, do that. Or if you can't, I think it would be probably quite helpful to be able to somehow record that the fact that this is a city-based value rather than an org-based value.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to clarify in the documentation. I think it's important that we have some at least clear policy, because we don't know where some of the coordinates came from previously and what the decisions were, you know, how a particular building was chosen versus some other building and all of that. So if we can clearly tie it to a particular geonames ID, that is probably the best case, rather than someone decided at some point that these were the coordinates. But I think we'll just document it for now and work on more granular geonames identifiers in the future. All right, so moving on to domains and links and URLs of various sorts. That was an area we had lots of discussion on, so we made some fairly significant changes in the final draft. So this was looking at the current links, IP address, and email fields, and particularly thinking about what we can do to add information, or to kind of combine these into fields that actually work better for use cases. So we do have folks that are trying to match organizations based on domain names that they have. For example, they may have users with known email domains, and they're trying to match that to a ROR ID using a domain. We know of lots of people who are doing that by looking in the links field and stripping out protocol and subdomains and trailing slashes and things like that. So we were thinking about how can we clean that up a little bit and make it easier for folks who have that use case, while also maybe getting rid of some of the more extraneous fields. So background, we have 4 fields currently that deal with domains and URLs and links. We have email address and IP address, which were never populated by grid, so those are empty in all of the records. And then we have links, which is kind of a mixed bag of landing pages, about pages, various kinds of web pages, and then we have a Wikipedia URL field that is separate for some reason. The initial proposal proposed stripping that down to just domains, which folks weren't particularly happy about for lots of reasons. So we added back in the links field but also combined in the Wikipedia URL with other links that that might belong to the organization. So this has also been converted to a type value sort of structure, with the idea being that, at least for the initial round, we want to be able to kind of delineate the links that belong to the institution, that they at least maintain control of the URLs and the content, versus links that are about the institution but are not necessarily websites that belong to the institution. So we have proposed two types for now, website and Wikipedia, and we're happy to hear feedback on those, with the idea that maybe there will be other types in the future. And then removed email address and IP addresses and added in domains. There's a long section about the rules for domains on a given record. Basically, multiple domains will be allowed, but they can't be subdomains of other domains listed in the same record. And importantly, each domain can only appear on one ROR record. There was a long discussion in the initial draft document about IP addresses and the utility of having IP addresses in ROR records, which it would be useful to have information about all of the IP addresses that belong to an organization. However, what the discussion resulted in was that that is beyond the scope of ROR's scope admission. There are others who are working on that type of work. Also, the IP addresses field as it stood, which was just a list, is by far too simple to capture all of the different context of IP addresses that a large university, for example, might be administering, and that could pretty quickly devolve into a record that is primarily information about IP addresses. We have, all kinds of different blocks of IP addresses at large research universities that represent different things, and if people are using that for access to resources, they need more granular information than just a list of IP addresses or CIDR blocks. So we've left IP addresses out of this proposal, and have landed on these two fields. We left the links in because people felt strongly that actionable links to web pages were needed. Domains are useful, and I did clarify the policy for including subdomains and which domains are allowed. And yeah, IP addresses are beyond the scope. In terms of types, again, we have a section in the appendix that discusses types in more detail. So if you have comments on that, we strongly encourage you to comment on this section in the link types discussion. I know we're running close to the end of the time still. Just review the other two sections quickly, and then we can open up for questions. So in external identifiers, there were a couple of issues that we wanted to address that are a bit challenging currently. So external identifiers, and I guess it will be a little easier to look at in the document view. Currently, external identifiers are the only section where the type is also a field name, which has challenges for extensibility and other things. So external identifiers right now are, it's an object dictionary that has the external ID type as a key for each of these fields, which means it's difficult to change this without making a significant schema change, because we have to either add or remove entire fields rather than change controlled lists of allowed values. We also have some deprecated types hanging around in ROR metadata. There are ORGREF IDs. There are some country-specific identifiers that were sort of sparsely populated, and we're not really sure of the logic about why some were added and others weren't. They're not officially curated any longer. So we have all of these different types: UCAS, UKPRNS, a lot of UK higher education identifier systems data hanging out in there. The ones that we actively curate are funder registry, ISNI, Wikidata, and then we have the grid identifiers from the up to the last public grid release. So what we'd like to do to make that field more flexible for potential other identifier types in the future is to change that to use basically a type and value data structure with the identifier type moving into a type field. This proposal actually did not change from the initial draft. There was some discussion about this, and we are certainly open to feedback on this. Some of the comments that we had were the ID type should ideally be derived from an external controlled list. That's actually a bit challenging because as we look across different other persistent identifier systems and metadata schemas, there is not very much agreement on a controlled list for identifier types. So we're still thinking about that a bit, trying to make this as interoperable as possible, but that's an area where there is not consistently a controlled list that everyone is using. There was some discussion about preserving the data in deprecated types, although that is always available in previous data dumps if needed. There was a comment that the proposed data structure will make it somewhat more difficult to extract IDs of a particular type, and there could be mistakes. For example, a particular type is duplicated, although we do currently have validation in place to catch those sorts of things, and we will be certainly adjusting the validation to account for that. The current preferred and all designation, everyone agrees, is a bit confusing and inconsistent, and some of the fields have different data structures for those two fields. So one has some of them have strings with single values, and some have lists of values, and that is something that we will be looking to clean up as we make this schema change. All right, last section is administrative information, which everyone internally, and I think lots of people externally to ROR are really looking forward to. So we do not have any fields that provide any indication of the created or last modified date of a ROR record because GRID didn't include them either. So this is a new section that we are looking to add. We debated this a little bit about whether we should just tack created and last modified fields on to the end of the record. But based on other feedback that we had heard about tracking administrative information at a more granular level, we decided to add a new container field called admin so that it could be potentially extended in the future. The initial draft included just created and last modified date, but it came up in the feedback and also in our internal discussions that we would really need to know the schema version that a record was created in and last modified in for lots of different reasons. Internally for us, we need to know that to perform some curation tasks. So what we've come up with in the revised draft is a nested structure that separates created and last modified information, again, with the idea that we may extend this in the future to capture more detailed information. So that is it as far as the sections that we're looking at. Again, this is a semi-final draft, but we are looking for feedback, especially in those key areas, control lists for name types and link types, but other implementation specific feedback about the areas that we propose changes to. So this is open through April 7th. There are some notes about providing feedback at the top of this document, but we really ask that you provide feedback in comments in this document so that we can kind of capture the context of the discussion and everything's centralized all in one place so we can easily export it. All right, so we have a few minutes left and would like to ask if there are any questions at this time. Yeah, Charlie, I see you have a hand raised.
Yeah, so I have like a general question about the way that curation is done. So this document and the schema that we're discussing, I'm curious, is this the document where the sort of single source of truth for ROR comes from? Or is there a sort of an alternate format where curation happens and then it gets serialized into this format?
Yeah, so there is a guide for curators. So basically we will take this document and then kind of codify it into curation guidelines and metadata policies. We have a GitHub repository that is the working repository for curation that is not only the place where the record changes are actually made, not that one. So here in ROR updates, this is where the curation magic actually happens. There's a wiki attached to this repository that contains evaluation criteria and metadata policies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the text version of how this gets codified in terms of how the curation board reviews records and determines what the changes should be. Under the hood, there's lots of code that we then take and translate the schema into, there's a JSON schema document, which captures kind of the most basic bits of schema, but there's lots of detail that JSON schema can't capture. So there's a schema document and then a suite of validation code that that validates and enforces various constraints.
But in the end, it looks like inside this ROR updates repository, there's actually some JSON files that correspond to like the records themselves before they get turned into the super. Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks.
So yeah, this contains the records that are updated or created in each release. It does not contain the JSON for every single record.
So is like each release created by applying successively some like diffs to a base? Oh, okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So the base is the JSON data set. Our working repository for that is ROR. ROR data. The official version of record for each of these data dumps is in Zenodo.
Cool. I'd love to follow up with Adam, I think, on this sometime, but this is maybe not the best thing to get into the weeds on for this call. If someone else has got some comments, this is a good time for that. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to follow up with you. The only other thing I'll say that as everyone knows, curation is inherently subjective, but we do try to be as like transparent as possible about how we're curating the registry. So if there is some sort of ambiguity around something like a name or an identifier that we're reconciling, we do try and identify that in the various issues for every single request. So every request has comments both by me and our curation team that specify like our rationale for various decisions, which can be useful if you're looking at a specific change and why it might have occurred. So just keep that in mind. You can always search the issue relating, and they're all normally tagged by their ROR ID. So if at a given release you see a value changing, you can search for the corresponding issue in ROR updates and then see why that change was made.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, well, if you do come up with questions as you're looking through that document, you can actually ask those questions in the document if you like. We're in there frequently responding to comments and questions. You can also contact us directly at support@ror.org. Although if it's a question or a discussion about something in the metadata schema, we really like to have those conversations kind of out in the open in the document so that others can weigh in as well. But I look forward to seeing your feedback and look forward to getting the schema version 2.0 wrapped up and ready for implementation. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Liz. Thanks for joining us.